Welcome back to the Path of Longevity show, and I'm your host, Dr. Robert Lufkin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Stephen Sidoroff.
Before we begin, I want to take a moment to tell you about some new free online masterclasses that Steve and I are offering. For example, we know that inflammation drives all chronic diseases and aging. That's why it's called inflammaging. But we're now learning that this inflammaging can be reversed. And one of our masterclasses will spell out the top 4 ways to reverse it. If you're interested, see the link in the show notes. And now back to this week's episode.
We will look at a very interesting topic today with regard to longevity and health, coffee. And I know this is a subject near and dear to many people's hearts because coffee is widely used by people in our country and other countries. And so we want to take a look at how it relates to health and longevity. And I'm happy to have a coffee expert with us. Andrew Salisbury is here. Andrew, welcome to our program.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you. And let's start by talking. First of all, a while ago, there were a lot of studies that actually indicated some problems with coffee, and those studies, I think, have been widely debunked because when they looked at heavy users of coffee, they didn't control for other factors such as perhaps the other health habits of people who are high coffee drinkers. And so that confounding of information led to some false positives, so to speak, around that. Let's start off by telling us a little bit about your background, and then maybe we can go into that as a jumping off point, Andrew.
Yeah, and that's actually a very good point. A lot of these studies in the 50s didn't look at cigarette smoking or alcohol consumption, and obviously what we know now is likely to be a big impact. So once they actually sorted for that, most of the findings reversed benefits of coffee. So it'd be useful to go into a little bit of background on purity.
On you and your interest in this subject.
Okay, well, it's sort of a funny story. I'm originally from the software industry in Latin America. I sold a business in 2011, and we spent some time traveling, my wife and I and daughter, and the great trip, fantastic, amazing time. But when we got back, she started having some health issues. We couldn't really pinpoint what it was, but she was very low energy, and I was a tea drinker. So she was drinking lots of coffee, and I was saying, look, okay, it's time to give up your coffee. I really think from everything I've learned about coffee and health, that coffee isn't good for you. She was very resistant to the idea of giving up her coffee. And so I met 2 professors at the Institute of Coffee Studies in Vanderbilt, and I fully expected them to give me all the arguments why coffee was bad for you. And they just gave me a very long shopping list of all the health benefits of coffee. And so I just realized that it's a little bit more of a deeper question than coffee per se as a food. You have to look at the quality of coffee, and that coffee can be very good for health. And so that's when I started down this journey of really looking at the fact that here's a product that people do every single day. At least 164 million Americans get up and drink a cup of coffee, and many of them think it's a guilty pleasure. And it's really probably one of the healthiest things that you can do. So that's sort of the disconnect for me in my mind.
Right. Yeah. And, this is an important topic simply because its use is so prevalent in our country. And yeah, a lot of people have this conception that it's not good for you in some way. And, we can get into some of the potential dangers of it, but let's start by looking at some of the positive qualities of coffee that can have a positive impact on health and longevity. One of them is it has some role in antioxidant control. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, the main antioxidant in coffee is a thing called chlorogenic acids, and there's 11 sorts of chlorogenic acids in coffee. They're all healthy compounds, But what's interesting about coffee is it's the number one source of antioxidants in the American diet if you're a coffee drinker. So, the important thing to note is so many people drink coffee. It's a supplement you don't forget to take. You can do it every single day. And it's the number one source of antioxidants, mainly because the chlorogenic acids in coffee are really a rich form of antioxidant and polyphenol, but also because we do it every single day without fail. And so if you talk about a high leverage point, the cup of coffee that you drink has a big impact in your overall health.
Mm-hmm. And so related to that, one of the kind of foundations of our program has to do with what impacts inflammation. Yeah. And does coffee play a role in reducing inflammation, or does it raise inflammation?
That's probably one of the biggest advantages that coffee has, and one of the reasons why the health benefits of coffee seem to be just so diverse. Impacts on the liver, heart, prevention of type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia. I mean, there's a whole long range of health benefits that are associated with good coffee, and it leads to the fact that it reduces inflammation and free radicals in the body. And so reduction of inflammation is obviously linked to prevention of disease. And so, that's possibly one of the biggest health benefits of the coffee is the antioxidants.
Mm-hmm. And I guess this is a good point in our conversation to talk about dose response.
Yeah.
And so, some people just have one cup of coffee in the morning, or one or two, or some people have as many as 5 or more cups a day. How many cups would you say you need to really get the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory benefit of coffee?
Yeah, we're lucky to have on our advisory board Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, who's last dean of admission for Harvard Med School, and he's a liver surgeon. And he gets this question all the time, and he keeps having the same answer. He says, coffee really isn't, people say, oh, yeah, everything in moderation. That's the nice thing about coffee. Sure, it's good for you, but everything in moderation. And he feels like it's dose dependent. In other words, the more you drink, the more your body can deal with any potential impact of coffee, the better it is for your overall health. And this is where the conversation gets a little bit interesting. The problem is there's positive compounds in coffee and there's negative compounds in coffee. The reactions that we typically feel from coffee are typically negative compounds that can be sourced for or roasted away, or making sure that there's nothing prevalent in the end cup. So coffee can be very good for you, but you need to pay attention to your body and just see how your body reacts. Because some people are fast metabolizers of caffeine, some people are slow metabolizers, which means that, we've all had that experience where, somebody could drink a cup of double espresso at 11 o'clock at night and go to sleep like a baby. Somebody else at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it affects their sleep. So your individual, the way you're wired is going to impact how much coffee you can drink comfortably.
Yeah. So let's take a look at some of those potentially negative consequences. I know they range from anxiety, insomnia, perhaps digestive issues, and of course addiction.
Yeah.
Can you speak on this in terms of the downside of coffee drinking, and put that in the context of our conversation?
Well, one of the unintended benefits of us making every decision based on health is we got a lot of anecdotal information from 28,000 testimonials now so far, 29,000 testimonials, that this is our coffee is one that we can drink. But I'm not saying that just as an advertising for our coffee. It's the fact that there's certain compounds in coffee which, if you pay attention to when you're sourcing for that coffee, you can completely remove the bad consequences of coffee. So in other words, jitters, nervousness, acid reflux, anxiousness are all a result of bad quality coffee. They're not a result of coffee itself. They're often a result of things like pesticide residue, heavy metals in the soil, mycotoxins that can occur in coffee at different stages of the process. Even coffee that's been left after roasting maybe 20, 30 days, you're starting to see a rancid build up on the coffee beans, and people are very sensitive to that. So to cut a long story short, if you have really good quality coffee that's fresh and is roasted for health, or they've maximized it for health, it can be very good for you without any of the side effects.
Let's take a break. Rob, I'm hearing some like echoing and sound in the background there. Can you see if there's any way you can improve the
Is this from
sound?
me? You think?
It went away for a moment, then it came back, and that's why I stopped.
Let's see. I'm muted. So it's not coming from my end. There's no, I'm going to put on headphones just to make sure there's no speaker. Let me change that.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was coming from you. I think Andrew, maybe.
Oh no.
What's what sound are you using? What are you using for audio?
Just the laptop, but I can actually use, perhaps I can use this. This might have a better. Let's see if this makes any difference.
Okay, great.
Um,
Yeah, when we started, it was that echo was there, but then it went away, and now it came back, and that's why I stopped. I figured, let's see if we can get it good.
yeah.
I don't hear it now. I don't hear that echo now, actually.
Huh. I'm just trying to find the adapter for this. I don't use it all the time because I have the same problem. I have a when I use it, we seem to get an echo as well some of the time. So let me try. Maybe this might do it. Yeah.
So, Andrew, you mentioned certain toxins that might be in coffees. Can you expand on that? What might be in the typical coffee? And then, is it good for having a coffee that's organic, for example? And in general, can you indicate what you want to be avoiding in the coffee, particularly for people who drinking it on a regular basis, and what you want to make sure you include?
Yeah, so our focus was we're going to make every decision based on health without compromise. So the things that really matter starts with it. The coffee needs to be organic. That's a very easy 5-minute decision. Nobody was arguing that pesticides like glyphosate and endosulfan and the sort of pesticides that are sprayed on crops in Latin America was good for the health. So very quick decision. It needs to be organic. You also need to find specialty grade coffee, and specialty grade coffee means that it has the least amount of defects in the coffee. And defects that are considered primary defects are all as a result of poor farming practices or practices in terms of the roasting or of the beans. So it needs to be organic. It needs to be specialty grade coffee. It needs to be grown in its natural environment. So after years and years of testing, the chlorogenic acids in coffee are highest when you're getting your coffee from organic regenerative farms. So we look for certain labels. One of those labels is Smithsonian bird friendly. It's not because we're focused on wildlife, and while we do care about the planet, our focus on Smithsonian bird friendly is that would give us a lead to show that the coffee was grown in its natural habitat, because the Smithsonian Institute tracks the amount of shade trees and the cover and that sort of thing, so that migratory birds would land on your coffee plants. Whereas with industrial farming, you've just got tractors and rows of coffee and tractors going between it to harvest the coffee. So organic, specialty grade, it needs to be grown in its natural environment. It needs to be tested for mold, pesticides, heavy metal. We're looking for things like mycotoxins which come from the mold, because the problem with coffee is it can be a relatively dirty farming practice, and then you're shipping the coffee for months across the ocean. There's some risks involved in that, so we have to test for those compounds.
Andrew, are you saying that there's some coffees and coffee companies that do not do all of that testing?
I think we are probably, I want to say maybe there's 2 or 3 coffee companies I know that do some basic level of testing, the rest don't. I mean, it's one of my sort of pet peeves, which is there's a lot of talk about mycotoxins and mold in coffee. It's one of the easiest things that you can test for. So I would encourage every coffee company and every customer to ask their coffee company to make sure that their coffee is tested to be free of mold. It's $100 test per container. Everybody should do it. Nobody does. And the reason is because the consumer isn't asking for that. And as a result of it, they don't want to turn back some shipments that maybe wouldn't have passed.
Oh, very interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting. And so are you also saying that your process of looking for naturally grown coffee beans, are you saying that they potentially or actually have higher levels of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds?
Absolutely. So we work with Dr. Adriana Ferrar from the University of Brazil, and she's one of the biggest probably experts on coffee and health in the world. And early on, when we started looking at this, we were hoping to find a coffee that was in one particular farm that was high in antioxidants, and we would buy up all of the supply of that farm. But she educated us pretty quickly that the amount of antioxidants vary from crop to crop and harvest to harvest. So getting a lead or getting a steer to say, you know, we want to have organic, regeneratively farmed coffee just puts us in the same sort of realm of what we need. Then we have to lab test coffee against each other for the ones that are highest in antioxidants. And we do a sort of king of the castle. We're always picking the ones that are highest in antioxidants as our driver. And that can vary tremendously. So it's one of the big challenges. And that is one area that only we do as a coffee company. I don't know of any other coffee company in the world who has their results and testing of chlorogenic acids and the compounds in their coffee. But it matters a lot, yeah.
Well, all of this is useful information for people who drink coffee on any regular basis. It's good to be informed about this as well as all the other kind of products and areas that we are focused on. Does coffee also have provide some brain health benefits?
There's lots of large studies, both on longevity and also on brain health around coffee. And the one that I sort of focus on the most is the British Medical Journal did a study around 496,000 people followed over 12 years. And it was a study where they were looking at various markers and various factors. There was an impact directly in Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and all forms of mortality in that 10-year period. So you were something like, depending on sex, 12 to 16% less likely to die in that 10-year study period if you were drinking 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day. So that sort of leans to the whole endemic, you know, it affects all parts of the system.
Mm-hmm. So I actually was going to ask you about this study that crossed my desk, and maybe it's the one you're just talking about, because it was a very, very large study of over 400,000, in which they found a correlation between coffee use on the one hand and cardiovascular disease on the other. Is that the same study?
It might be a different one. Do you know I should have asked you before what the actual study was. There's so many now. The interesting thing about coffee is there's over 25,000 studies on coffee and health. It's probably the most studied food on the planet. So you know we're in very solid shape with that.
Well, but this one found that people that drank more coffee had greater benefit. I don't remember if it was 20 or 30% decrease in in likelihood of getting some kind of cardiovascular issue.
Yeah. The studies that I've seen typically range from, as you said, 25 to 40% for those people who are drinking 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day. And what's interesting is they're not actually looking at the quality of coffee that you drink. So, you know, in a lot of these studies, it's instant coffee, or it's just, you know, it's Starbucks, it's just coffee that's not necessarily focused on the health benefits of coffee. So our big takeaway is that the coffee can be incredibly good for you. And we think that if we pay attention to how it's sourced and how it's roasted, we can make it better for you. So already, I think it's a very good product.
Right. Well, some of the side effects, such as insomnia, anxiety, probably are more linked to the caffeine aspect of the coffee.
Yeah.
Do you get the same benefits when you drink decaf as regular?
The answer is, I think it first of all, it depends on how that is decaffeinated. So there's 4 main methods of decaffeinating coffee. There's solution decaffeination, which is like ethyl acetate, which is putting a chemical on the coffee. And the problem is that leaches away a lot of the antioxidants in the coffee. So you're getting maybe 40 to 50% less antioxidants. So if we do everything right and then we decaffeinate the coffee using that process, then we're losing a lot of the benefit. We only use Swiss water process. Another method which is very effective is critical CO2, which is also good, but environmentally we chose Swiss water just because in terms of shipping, we would have to ship to Germany and back, and we just felt like that was going to create too much of an environmental footprint, and we didn't see any benefits in terms of the health benefits. So, and what's interesting in this study with the British Medical Journal, when they looked at the 498,000 people, is they actually did a test at the end to see whether people who are fast metabolizers of caffeine or slow metabolizers of caffeine had any impact on their longevity. And the idea was, look, if you're a fast metabolizer of caffeine, it goes quickly through your system, and therefore you're going to have less benefit in terms of longevity than if you're a slow metabolizer of caffeine. And they noticed no difference whatsoever. So the health benefits of coffee don't really come from the caffeine, with the only disclaimer that I would say in neurological diseases like Parkinson's, there's been a link to caffeine being helpful.
Mm-hmm. Can you say more about that potential protection against Parkinson's disease with coffee?
It seems to only be before Parkinson's develops, and it seems to be more highly linked to the caffeine in the coffee than any other compounds. And so we all know the impacts of coffee. We feel more alert, we feel more focused, and I think that's the main benefit is it's neuroprotective. The caffeine is neuroprotective in terms of the brain, and so that's
okay. And you also mentioned some potential benefit with regard to the liver.
Yeah.
Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so the liver is probably the most well-supported health benefit that coffee has shown to help with. So as we mentioned, Sanjeev Chopra is a liver surgeon, and I'll quote him directly when he says, in 35 years of a liver surgeon, he's never seen anybody with end-stage liver disease who drinks 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day. He said that with every cup from the baseline, you have a 20% lower chance of ever developing liver cirrhosis, fatty liver, or end-stage liver disease for every cup you drink from the baseline. So if you drink 2 cups and you move to 3, you get 40% protective effect, moving to 60%. And this is, so this is something that I know he speaks to doctors, sometimes 6,000 plus doctors, and he talks to them about the health benefits of coffee. And he says, even today, most of these doctors are sheepish about the idea that they drink a lot of coffee. And he's saying it is the #1 thing that you should be doing to prevent the risk of liver problems. Now, alcohol has its own set of problems that comes with it, but in terms of protecting the liver, coffee is shown to be one of the healthiest things you can drink.
Very interesting. And so, yeah, again, back to the study that I had read. On the one hand, it talked about, I think they studied up to 5 cups a day, or reported on up to 5 cups a day having benefits, but then their conclusion was that they recommended between 2 and 3 cups a day. Do you have any comments on quantity, dose, things like that?
I think it goes back to what we talked about originally, which is that unfortunately coffee can be a bit of a balancing act. The positive compounds in coffee, the antioxidants, the chlorogenic acids, are all beneficial. The negative compounds, pesticide residue and mycotoxins and stale coffee and some of these problems cause inflammation in the body. So I think after a certain level, you're battling against the fact that the negative compounds are battling the positive compounds. And so we don't know this for a fact, and we're going to be doing testing on this. But what we believe is that if we can remove the bad qualities in coffee and increase the good qualities in coffee, then it's much more likely to be healthy for you to drink more coffee, because there's nothing in coffee itself that should be, you should stop drinking effectively, apart from the sensitivity to caffeine.
Yeah, and I would say that probably a good percentage of people who drink coffee in the morning, one of the things that they've discovered, and whether either discovered or it's the reason they continue to drink coffee, is because it enhances their cognitive awareness and performance.
Right.
So it's interesting. It's sort of like the drug of choice. We can say it's a substance that actually impacts brain function in that regard positively. With very little downside as well.
Yeah, and we think it could be made better. I mean, I think the interesting thing about coffee is that coffee that is good for health is also grown in a way that's good for the environment. And just concentrating on the compounds in coffee and concentrating on the avoiding the bad things and maximizing the good things in coffee means that I think we can actually improve the quality of coffee for health.
Mm-hmm. So if someone is wanting, when they go to the store, to choose a coffee that maximizes the positive benefits while is eliminating some of these toxins and chemicals that it can impair the experience in one way or another, is this information on the labels of coffee, or how does a person figure that out?
Not really, and it's actually the reason why it was so frustrating to me in the early stage. In the early stage, I wanted to find out, great, what coffee can I buy my wife that deals with these health benefits? And they could give me a list of the things that I should look for, which is what I give you now. But they couldn't tell me one specific brand that I should look for. So that's one of the reasons we started down this path. But I often use this sort of analogy. If my wife was on a trip and she couldn't have purity coffee, what coffee should she look for? She should find the best specialty roaster she should find. So you want to have the coffee that's fresh. You want it to be organic if possible. I mean, that would probably be a minimum requirement. Specialty grade fresh coffee, and you wanted it roasted at a medium level. The thing about roasting coffee is, think of it like a roast curve. In the beginning of roasting coffee, you create a negative compound called acrylamide, which is possibly carcinogenic, and you get that with most sort of like toast and fries and that sort of thing. The later stage of roasting, you create a thing called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, which also come from any burnt food. And in the middle, you've got a curve that goes down of antioxidants where it starts high and then you roast away all the antioxidants. The big challenge when you're buying coffee out is these big chains like to make sure that the coffee you taste, in Singapore tastes the same way as the coffee in Seattle. And the very best way to do that is to over roast the coffee. So you're roasting away a lot of the antioxidants, but you're getting a uniform taste. And so that's sort of one of the things to look for. You want to be on the lighter side of the roast. And if possible, and I think this would be difficult to find, you'd like that coffee to be tested for mold and mycotoxins and heavy metals. If you can't find that, which would be pretty difficult, you should at least get organic specialty grade coffee, medium roast, and it needs to be fresh.
Got it. Very, very good advice. Well, this has been very interesting, talking about a subject that I think most people listening to this summit have a personal interest in. Yeah. And so it's good to know that for the most part, you can be drinking coffee. It could be healthy for you, and there's very little downside of that as well. Any final comments you want to say on the subject, Andrew?
I would just say that generally it's one of these very small adjustments that you can make. I mean, whether it's our coffee or another coffee that you're looking for, improve the quality of a product that you do every single day. I mean, you know, it starts with coffee, then I think it's eggs is the second most consumed product in the US diet. So if you're doing it every single day, a small adjustment is valuable. And, you know, I would just say pay attention to that. And I also feel like that coffee that is grown in a way that's good for health can be good for the environment. And there's going to be more and more conversations about that. I know it's not your area of specialty, or what we're not talking about here, but I think it's very important that coffee is seen as medicine, food is medicine, and that also that climate change is something that we can have an impact of, and it's going to affect coffee, and it's going to affect the quality of coffee. So we need to grow the coffee in a way that's good for the environment.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And again, Andrew, thank you so much for this informative talk on one of the most commonly used products in our country and other countries as well. So thank you again.
My pleasure.
And before we close, do you have any kind of a pamphlet on this subject that people listening in can avail themselves on?
Yeah, we'll have something downloadable on our site with this the code that you're going to be putting up, and they're welcome to look at all the details about what we do differently in terms of process, and what we would encourage them to ask their coffee companies to do when it comes to the new process.
Very good. Thank you very much, and thank you again for the conversation.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
This is for general information and educational purposes only, and it's not intended to constitute or substitute for medical advice or counseling, the practice of medicine, or the provision of healthcare, diagnosis, or treatment, or the creation of a physician-patient or clinical relationship. The use of this information is at their own user's risk. If you find this to be on the value, please hit that like button to subscribe to support the work that we do on this channel. And we take your suggestions and advice very seriously, so please let us know what you'd like to see on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time.